Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AccuColor webinar series. Today we have our good friends. This is webinar number 3, Raph, Nogal, and Yadú Fereaud. Today we have Speedlights versus Studio Strobes. It's a awesome pre-recorded segment. We're going to play that. It'll run for about 45, maybe 50 minutes. But as soon as it wraps up, we're going to take Q&A. Let's greet Raph and Yadú. Guys, welcome.
Thank you very much. No, it's great to be here again. Again, this is the third webinar, and this is kind of a lighting series. We obviously want to go off in different directions, but we felt that to go through this kind of segments of the different types of studio strobes, constant lights, natural light, this is kind of the progression where most photographers, when they get introduced to photography, they've got to choose which of these they really want to use for their photography. So, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one. It'll take us back because I think we both started with, using speedlights and smaller strobes. And maybe if you're new to photography and new into lighting, this is perhaps some of the equipment that you may be in your near future as well. So hopefully the webinar helps you decide, and then we'll go. I won't spoil everything now, but we'll go through some of the details in the webinar. And afterwards, just we're here for questions if you guys have anything. Hey guys, welcome to another webinar with BenQ. My name is Raph and Nogal. I'm a portrait and wedding photographer based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I have Yadú Fereaud, a portrait and fashion photographer as well based out of Toronto. And we're really excited about today's webinar because we're going to talk to you guys about speedlights and off-camera flash and the differences between them, how we use them together, what are some of the benefits, some of the obstacles that we encounter using those systems. So it'll be a really fun one because we're doing a live shoot outside today. So without further ado, we'll introduce our model, Julia. She'll be helping us out today.
Excellent,
Awesome,
so let's get started. All right, so talking about speedlights, here we have ProPhoto A10. As we always say, it doesn't necessarily matter the type of speedlight that you use. There are a couple of things though that when I started and I was looking at speedlights, they kind of mattered. Things like battery life, recycle time, and things like that. And we'll go into that with some more detail. But for me, I would always use a speedlight as an off-camera flash. So it didn't matter if it was a strobe or whatever kind of lighting. Even when we talked the last time about constant lights, It was always a separate light away from the camera with a modifier. Now I know you as a wedding photographer, it's normal to have on-camera flash and have it physically on the camera, and you're using it in your weddings, events, getting into the crowds and things like that. So it's used a different way that I never used it for. Now, truth be told, when I started, yes, I was using it on camera, but I was using it on camera to bounce. So I would actually have, for example, a reflector. The camera, the speedlight was faced towards that reflector, and that became my modifier that then I would shoot to the model. So I was always never wanting that direct flash. For me, it's always,
a certain look.
Yeah, it was always kind of like paparazzi style. And what's interesting is that there's some times where I'm shooting a model and the model will say, hey, can I get a paparazzi look? And I'm like, you mean direct flash? So it's weird because I would take my studio strobe or whatever and then literally put it as if it was on top of my camera, or bring the camera underneath the modifier to then get that look. And then maybe, take the modifier off and do bare bulb. But that was kind of the discussion of on camera versus off camera in terms of the flash. For you, do you prefer, even when you're using a speedlight, do you prefer it to be off camera or on camera?
Well, I think it depends on the situation. As a wedding photographer, I'm doing things indoors and I'm able to bounce the light and I'm able to access it quickly. And so there are times where that's, we're really just trying to run and gun at certain points of that event. So it does come in handy having it on camera. But of course, these lights have come a long way. I remember, the only other option for off-camera lighting other than Speedlights was really to get anything that was battery powered, that had, you know, motorcycle battery and cables and all that kind of stuff. So even those small Speedlights became our off-camera option because they were so portable and you know, and easily accessible. So they've definitely come a long way in terms of modifiers and things like that, which we will cover. But yeah, I think there's uses for both, I think, depending on the situation. And sometimes that paparazzi look is all you really need and all you really, you know, that's what you're going for, and that's the tool to get the job done.
One of the things that we won't be able to kind of showcase here because we are outside is what you mentioned right now about bouncing light. One of the tips that I was always told is be cautious of the wall that you're bouncing off of, basically of the color of that wall. If it's a red wall and you're bouncing, you are bouncing red towards your subject. So a lot of times when I was shooting with, you know, on-camera flash and I was bouncing up, I was kind of always looking to see, are the ceilings white?
Yeah.
Is it cream? How is that going to reflect down? And sometimes, depending on the house or the location, if it was green, I was always like, oh no, like I already knew that that was going to reflect that color, and then I would get these kind of greenish looking shots.
Yeah.
Pretty much the same thing here. Here we have grass, and if we were shooting natural light with the sun, well, the sun is hitting the grass, and the green of the grass reflects onto the subject, and then you get that green cast of that color on the model's face, which again, we don't want, which is the reason why I like using the off-camera flash even when I'm on location. So anyway, anything else to say about any tips that we might not be covering because we're outside right now?
No, I think, you know, the bouncing thing is, you know, I always like to bounce wherever the subject is looking. So if we're looking at the barrel of the lens and my subject their nose is off the center on that side, I'd be bouncing on this side. If my subject is on this side of the lens, I'll be bouncing off that wall. I don't typically like bouncing up because what goes up must come down. And typically I would never be putting a softbox all the way up here. I'd be putting it a little bit lower to get some more light in the eyes, so we're not getting those raccoon eyes as we call them. So getting light in either direction is always great, because if you go to that direction, it comes back from that direction, and now it's more pleasing in general.
One of the things, and I guess this talks about Speedlights in terms of battery life, is that when I was shooting Nikon, for example, I had a lot of SB700s and SB900s.
Yep.
And I would almost collect them. So I had like 5 of one, 2 of the other. But because they used AA batteries, this was one of the reasons why I started going away from Speedlights and more to the studio strobes. And during that time, yes, Profoto had, for example, the B1, which was expensive, but at least it had that battery pack that you can just swap out and have another lithium battery, as opposed to weddings that I was shooting where it was a package of that Costco 48 pack of AA's where you're just constantly going through batteries. And then when they said, well, why don't you, instead of throwing away all these batteries, why don't you use the rechargeable batteries, the nickel metal hydrate batteries? Yeah. But I found that they didn't hold the charge as well, or it didn't last as long as the alkaline disposable batteries. So then, yes, you were using something that you could recharge, but it wouldn't last as long, so you're changing them out even more so than the alkaline. So when I started looking at Speedlights, where all the companies were using, and still some of them still do, one of the reasons why Profoto, the A1X, the A1, the A10 became so popular is because they used the lithium batteries. That was a big thing for me, that if I needed something really portable, really small, that can kind of fit into a grab and go bag, then the fact that this had the lithium battery, for me, was a big change.
And on that note, one thing that I love about this specifically is that once we take these modifiers off, when you look at the actual battery, it's extremely easily taken off and on. So I was in positions at weddings where, you know, I'd have an extra one in my shirt pocket or in my pant pocket, or, you know, and if I happen to run out during a moment where, let's say, there's an entrance or something's about to happen, I can swap this in and out within seconds and be back online in terms of my flash being available to me. I remember, you know, struggling through AA's and you know, putting them in the wrong way, and you know, one of them spilling on the floor, and I'm trying to collect it, you know, in the, you know, I'm trying not to panic as things are happening, and you know, obviously with weddings and events, it's real time stuff. We don't get to redo anything, so yeah, this definitely helped in terms of getting us back up and running if batteries were an issue.
Now you're going to notice right away, the way I have the Speedlight set up is with this modifier. This is the way that I would shoot if I was shooting a Speedlight or a studio strobe. It's always the light with a modifier, and I have the trigger on the camera. We didn't kind of mention this before, but I'm shooting with an A7 Mark IV, and the lens that I'm using today is my favorite lens, which is the 135 1.8 G Master. This is my most favorite focal length, especially if I'm shooting outdoors, just because, again, distance doesn't really matter. If I wanted full body, I can back up as much as I want to get full body. I just love the look and how sharp this lens is. Again, it's my personal favorite. So with this, if I was in a studio, and I've mentioned this before, there's space to deal with. So I probably couldn't use the 135 unless my back was all the way up against the wall, and I would still be getting maybe a 3/4 length shot. But having said that, the light, whichever light that I'm using, is still going to be that distance to the subject, and then I can move around wherever I want depending on the lens that I have. So that's the reason why, for me, I wouldn't have this Speedlight on my camera with this lens, because again, the distance that I'd be shooting and the power of that flash to cover and actually make it, and again, it's not the look that I'm, the end result that I'm kind of looking for. And so that's why you see both of these modifiers are basically 2 feet each. So it's kind of the same spread of light, if you want to call it that. And so that's why, regardless of whether it's a studio strobe or a Speedlight. I know you wanted to mention about the stand as well, because it's got this really light stand. So for something like a Speedlight, yes, you can have your gear that is portable, just like the Speedlight is portable.
Yeah, when you look at sort of the general differences between, what is a Speedlight and what is a monolight, obviously size is one thing. You could tell right away they're shaped differently, they weigh differently, different amounts. And so we're able to kind of get away with, different modifiers, again, that we'll talk about. But also, yeah, the gear, like the light stand could be lighter because the light itself is lighter, and the modifier itself has to be lighter. You can't put a 8-foot, 5-foot octa on here. It's just not going to, it's not the right equipment for it, where you can do that with, something a little bit bulkier, right? So.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the test shot first. Julia, are you ready?
Yeah.
Of course, always ready. Okay, so again, I'll let her know this is going to be her main light. Now this is kind of different when we're outside. Right now we are in a shaded area, but there is still sunlight hitting kind of harshly over there. So when I'm outside, obviously ambient light might be the main light, and I might be using this light as a kicker or hair light, or maybe a side light, or maybe just a fill. In this case, I do want to tell her that this light is the main light for her, which means that I'm going to try to darken the ambient light. I'm going to bring up the aperture. So I know that you mentioned that you would probably be shooting in high-speed sync. I myself am going to close down just to create a difference. I'm going to stay at sync speed, so I'm going to be at 1/200th of a second shutter speed, and I'm going to then close down the aperture to an f10 and then shoot ambient light as a secondary, and then the main light will be the Speedlight and then also the studio strobe. So we'll start off just to show what an f10 will look like as a test. So taking that shot, I already can see at the back of the camera that it's going to come out dark, because that's how it reads here. And then I turn on the flash. Now this is one of the things, again, that we kind of talk about as well, but for the light to the distance, I've got it about 2 to 3 feet away from her. And this is kind of, again, just to test out what it will look like with that flash. So let me take the first image. We fired it. We look, okay. And so, yeah, light is there. I myself would want it to be a little more powerful. I have 2 choices now. Because we're in the shaded area, I can open up my aperture to allow more light to come in, or I can increase the power of the flash. For something like this, because this is a 76 watt second flash, compared to the studio strobe, which is 250 watt seconds. Power is going to be one of those things that is going to be a difference between them. So there is going to be obviously a time where I've maxed out the power of a Speedlight, and then I have to make other changes to my exposure to compensate for the fact that this just isn't strong enough. Now, back in the day, I would even have 2 Speedlights.
Oh yes.
And it would be, instead of having one shooting at full power where the recycle time would take so long, I would have 2 of them at half power so that the recycle time would be quicker. But then I've kind of spent the money on 2 Speedlights.
Well, I remember even a 3 brackets. There was for 3, and you would mount them where it would be a little like the Mercedes sign, right? One on top and one on either side, and you try to fill a big modifier like an umbrella with it.
So as a difference right now, I just changed my aperture from f10, I went to f6.3. Shutter speed remains the same, ISO remains the same, and that same distance, and now I have a proper exposure on the back of the camera. So just by making that adjustment, again, if my speed light is out of reach, it's too high or whatever, and I'm not going to make the change, now with ProPhoto, I can just go to my cell phone, make the change on my cell phone if I needed to do an increase of power or down. But because that is already at 8, to go up to, this goes up to 10.
It does, yeah.
So up to 10, we're already at full power, which means we would have to wait what, you know, I like the recycle time of the ProPhoto, but it's still a second and a half.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're going to get a little bit lesser recycling time here because the capacitors hold, you know, a little bit less. The battery is a little bit smaller as well. So that recycling isn't going to be as fast as you would have during, you know, using a monolight. And so, Yadú, when, for example, in a situation like this, and I know you're comparing the two, what would you choose? If you had a shootout today, after we're done here, let's say you have a photo shoot in this exact spot, what would you pick between the two? How do you make that decision?
So this kind of goes back to, depending on the time of the era that I would be shooting in. Back in the day, the choice would have been the Speedlight,
Of course.
because it was the most portable. It would fit in my camera bag. I didn't have this type of modifier. In fact, at that time, the Speedlights, because they were rectangular, I would buy, for example, the Westcott Black Rapid.
Yes.
Is it called the Black Rapid?
Oh, I don't know.
Or Rapid Box?
Rapid box.
Basically, and it's the 2-foot modifier for Speedlights. So I would have that as the modifier.
Right.
That would have been my choice 100%. But, and at that time, even the B1 was still fairly large. It's
Yes.
still a big
And
monolight.
it's much bigger than a B10 as well.
So once the B10 came out, I then kind of looked at both of them and said, well, to me, a ProPhoto B10 is a portable light system. It is more powerful. It does have faster recycle time. So my preference now is the B10, because even the stand, I probably wouldn't put the B10 with a big modifier on this stand,
Yep.
but this stand for me goes everywhere with me. So that setup, if I was going on location, and I've done weddings where I've brought that, and I've done indoors with the B10 with no problem. I love the fact that, again, the battery life is great, recycles really quickly, and the power. So I'm really happy with the ProPhoto B10. For me, the ProPhoto B10 is a portable light.
Right.
And because I don't physically put the light on the camera, for me, that's the best choice. If I was gonna put it on the camera to balance and things like that, obviously I couldn't do that with a B10. It would go to the ProPhoto. But yeah, that would be my choice. Yeah, let's switch it up. Let's see here. All right. The other thing that we kind of talked about before we started rolling was that both of these two modifiers have 2 layers of diffusion, but we did have to increase the power of the Speedlight to be a little more powerful. Again, it's a scale of 1 to 10 for ProPhoto, but the Speedlight is at an 8, whereas the B10 is at a 7.
Which is a quarter power, so 8,
Exactly.
just in case, just so for you guys who don't own ProPhoto, again, this is not a ProPhoto specific, you know, we're just using those examples because that's the equipment we use. But 10 is full power, 9 becomes half power, 8 becomes quarter power, and so on. As you know, we're used to fractions when we're looking at Speedlights and other systems. But just so you know, when we're talking about, when we say 8, we do mean a quarter power in that case.
So yeah, I really like these.
So how's that comparing to the Speedlight? Is it pretty similar?
So as I kind of go back and forth, one thing that I do notice, just again, when I'm looking through the viewfinder, is the color. So on the Speedlight, I'm getting, I guess, more yellow. And with the Photo B10, it's coming in more magenta. So you're getting a little more red. And then again, that's preference, but I like the colors that I'm getting out of the Photo B10.
But we also don't know if that's coming from the light or from the actual modifier, because now
True.
we are using two different modifiers, so we're not comparing apples to apples exactly.
Yeah.
So it could be either of those things, I guess. Right?
But that's really the only thing that I can visually see through the viewfinder. Now on these cameras, the viewfinder is higher resolution than looking at the back of the LCD.
Right.
So if I am checking focus or anything like that, I'm usually going through the viewfinder just to be a little more accurate for that reason. But both of them are giving me the same light in terms of the intensity. Obviously that one was set to a little bit higher power, quote unquote. But this one again is giving me the same look. Basically it's the same modifier, the same surface area, the same light position. So I could end up getting the same or similar results shooting with the Speedlight. For me, again, the preference is still the B10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
How do you want to showcase, because I know that you wanted to do a different type of...
Yeah, so I'll talk about a couple of different things here. One of them being, durability. We buy equipment, we make investments in these lights, and we obviously want them to last. And one way really to test durability is over time. So, without making drop tests or anything like that, we don't want to do that. But I mean, at the end of the day, durability comes in the form of just usage. And so, this light here, for example, has a lot more moving parts, right? So, as these wear out over the years, there is, more likeliness of something happening, or you bumping something and something possibly, going wrong. Versus here, where it's really just one single piece with a bracket. So, it's hard to talk about durability, really. It's just, again, has to do with time and your overall usage. Some people are quite rough with their gear. Some people are, a little bit, they baby everything as well. So it really depends where you're at. In terms of portability, that's another thing too. Someone might consider, a Speedlight versus a monolight based on portability. And I think that was a bigger factor, 10 years ago, before the B10 or the B1X or the B1 has come out. We had the B2 initially, where we had, from Photo, we had a head, but also cables and a battery. I remember using alien bees and my assistant having to carry a motorcycle battery, literally, and a converter.
That was the same
cables.
with Elinchrom.
That's right.
Elinchrom had the Ranger packs, which
Yes.
were those, acid-filled batteries that you had to drag.
Yeah, so durability was quite portability was quite noticeable back then. Right now, this versus this, I mean, yeah, there's a size difference. Obviously, there's a size difference in terms of the dimension of the actual head, where the light comes out. So, I consider both of these to be quite portable. This fits in my camera bag along with all my lenses and my cameras, so just as much as this does. So and I think it's subjective, I think, at this point. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about also power, and then I'll talk about kind of usage. And power, we talked about 76 watt seconds with this, and 250, or if you get the B10X Plus, or again, another brand that's slightly bit bigger, perhaps you're going to get maybe 500 watt seconds, so another stop of light. And I think, again, depending on what you're doing, depending on the circumstances, it's kind of, you just have to pick the tools for the job, right? If you're outside and it's, and the sun is right there and not over there, you are going to be battling a lot of, natural light, a lot of sun, and perhaps, something bigger will do the job versus something smaller, which, you're going to basically limit yourself based on, the power that you brought with you. So, I mean, how else would you talk about, power? Like when does that really come into become a factor for you?
I know that a lot of people talk about it in terms of distance, like how far can the light be from the model where the same amount of power can get there, where a light that's bigger, even the B10 Plus at 500 watts, a lot of people will always look at it like, well, just give me the one that has the most power, because then they just feel that they can bring the light further away and still get that the power that it will actually reach the subject. I really don't shoot that way. I never shoot with the modifier light really, really far away, where I would then rely on it being at full power. In fact, right now, shooting where I have to, close down the aperture to an f7 or an f10, that for me is also strange, because I would rather balance ambient light. Like right now, in the photos that I took, the background is really dark, and she really pops out because she's being lit and the background's not being lit. But if I were to change that and bring my aperture, open up my aperture a little bit more, where you can see more of the greenery around her, and I just use this as a splash of light on her, I would probably bring the power down.
Yeah.
So for me, I like the modifier to be closer to the subject, or as close that it'll be out of frame. So power doesn't really, I'm never at the max power. I'm never shooting at 10.
Where I think power also matters really in terms of lights that we choose is what modifier we're filling, right? If we are going to fill a 5-foot octabox with a diffusion panel or two inside, and perhaps put a grid on top of that, which is going to eat a little bit of light, that power is going to come in handy, because even though you may not want to shoot at full power, you may have to just to fill that big modifier. And so that's one of the cases where I think that's really matters more to me if I'm filling modifiers or putting grids on things versus, again, the distance thing. Because at the end of the day, we talk about softness of light or soft shadows. If you put a 5-foot octa 20 meters away, it's not going to be as soft as if you had it 2 feet away from your subject. So that matters as well, right? But anyways, let's. What I want to do is show you guys what photos look like on camera, and then kind of compare that to an off-camera option. And again, the versatility of an on and off-camera flash, like the A10, for example, or another type of Speedlight from different brands, is the fact that you can have it on and off camera. So again, if you're doing a lot of birthday parties or events, corporate events, things like that, and of course even weddings, this is a very versatile tool where you're able to really use it in both ways. Now, the limiting factor on camera, as you can see, as I face that towards the subject, is its location. There's no way for me to move this over here. Yes, I can hold it with my hand, but now it becomes off camera. So when we talk about it on camera, there's really just one way for that light to go out, and it's straight ahead. I'm also limited by the amount of modifiers that that I can use. So if I wanted to use something like this on here, if I do that, I can't see what I'm shooting, right? So there's a limit to what this can actually. And the magnet's quite strong here. Could you mind pulling that out? Thanks. So those are some of the limitations, right? But again, it's subjective, right? What are we photographing, and what do we need to accomplish? So let's take a quick shot with this and just see what things look like. So I'm just going to kind of pick a little pocket here. I'm just going to go first with the ambient light here. So I'm using the Alpha 1 and the 100 STF f2.8 lens, one of my favorite portrait lenses. I use this for headshots a lot. And we're just going to get a good sense of the light here. So I'm at ISO 100, and I am at f5.6, which it gives me the bokeh of a 2.8, which is great. That's what I love about this lens. And I'm at 1/60th of a second. So I'm just going to take a quick shot here. That's it, perfect. And again, it's quite underexposed. She is wearing a white shirt, so the shirt is quite prominent. And again, the leaves and everything in the background are quite dark. And on camera, let's see what this does. I'm going to go to TTL because I like to at least have a place to start. And I'm going to just have this do what it needs to do to give me a proper exposure. So let's have a quick look here. Nice. Good. So it's got, it's giving me more light. It's throwing light at me. I'm maybe 10 feet from the subject, and it's okay. It's not bad. It's filling in those shadows. There's not a lot of light going behind her, again, because I'm so far away. I'm 10 feet to her, and so the light is not really reaching the background, but it is filling the eyes and everything else. But it's also doing it in a very flat way, right? The light is coming directly at the subject without the opportunity of giving us any shadows or depth or dimension in the face.
And for you, when you have it on camera, do you kind of instinctively know what distance you can be? Like if you were at 20 feet, you would say, oh, this on-camera flash is not even going to reach. Or is there, if you have it at full power, do you kind of know this is the limit of where I can stand comparative to the...
Not necessarily. It really depends on my camera settings, right? If I am, right now I'm at 5.6. If I'm at f11 and I'm 20 feet back and I'm at ISO 100, yeah, there's going to be obviously limitations of how far that can reach. So it all depends really where you are. If you're indoors, a lot of times we do cocktail hours at, this is where we use on-camera flash, people just having cocktails and just chatting and having hors d'oeuvres at weddings. And so we'll use this just for those quick snapshots of people hugging and looking into the camera. To me, this is not the most creative way of using light. To me, it's kind of amateurish in a sense. It's got that look, that amateurish look to it, I suppose, if you want to call it that. But it is a certain type of look as well. There's obviously nothing wrong with it, but I like a little bit more control, a little bit more dimension in my images. So this is a great way to at least get something visually in front of you, where if it's a dark room, at least you'll get something. But if I had my way, I'd be going off camera for sure. So let's do that. Let's put on a trigger. I'll give this to you maybe. And I'll put on a trigger here and get a light in just to show you the differences here. And if you've done any kind of off-camera light before, you're going to see, you know that there's going to be a difference here with bringing in a bigger modifier like this and how that's going to compare to off-camera flash, or to on-camera flash rather, right? If you just give me that for a sec, obviously the difference right away, the size of this versus the size of that. I mean, there's no, that light has gone from here to a size of that. So obviously we're going to get a different effect. And we're going to get this nice and close to her too, maybe about 3 feet away versus 10. And that's going to be a noticeable difference. So I'm at 7A, just want to make sure I'm on the same channel here. And we're not even going to use that flash at all. I just want to kind of use this guy to show the differences here. So we're going to go to TTL. Yeah, and that first shot already is a huge difference. How we're seeing a lot of shadows on the other side of the face, opposite of the flash. And we're only at, we're at 5.7, so we've got a lot of power to play with here, and we're still filling quite a big modifier. I haven't changed my camera settings. I kept the 1/60th of a second, 5.6 ISO 100 consistent. And again, we can move this back, have a bit more harder shadows, or we can move it even closer. And yeah, the look is just a different look, right? And that's, I think subjectively, that's when we can make those decisions on what.
With the modifier, the click behind you, this is another thing that I've seen, of course, also in weddings, is when you're the main photographer, but that you actually have an assistant that's holding the light.
Yeah.
Not to say that the B10 is much heavier than a Speedlight, because I don't think so, but for someone who might be following you around, if you're shooting tables or shooting in the reception, and you have a human light stand, that person might be literally just coming around, and it might
100%.
be easier to kind of maneuver this than it would be a heavier studio strobe.
Oh, 100%. Even just the fact that it's not on a light stand is already night and day difference, because we don't have to worry about the legs kicking out and getting in between tables and things like that. So this is already, this is a nice way to combine the features of what we love about these monolights and the ability to use bigger modifiers and have that in that portable kind of way. So that's a really great point, because I do use that quite a bit. And again, if you're shooting weddings, assistants are almost mandatory, I would say, because then you have the ability to do this type of thing, right?
Do you also notice that, for example, if you're at a wedding and you have someone that's assisting you, are they already familiar and constantly like monitoring battery life and things like that Things like recycle time, does it matter to you that the recycle time is fast or slow, depending on if you're shooting something that's important, like an important moment in the wedding, and you're like, okay, I need the flash to actually do its thing?
Definitely. So my style of shooting when I'm doing creative stuff is not very fast. I do pose and talking, and then I take 1 or 2 shots. So typically I don't need that fast recycling time. But when it's a dance, let's say they have something planned, they've done a dance together, and they're going to do a dip at the end, and they really wanted that photo because they worked super hard to get it done. I want to make sure that, you know, I have a couple of bursts of flash available to me. So that's when that would come in handy, right? And again, that's something that you have to just know when that becomes an issue for you, or when you need it and when you don't.
Yeah, for me, again, depending on the shoot, if it's a fashion shoot, I just instinctively like the fact that I don't have to worry about recycle time as being an issue. That's one of the reasons why I normally don't bring the flash up to full power, because I do want that if she's moving and she gets into that perfect pose and I'm looking through the viewfinder, I want that flash to go. And so I don't want to have to say, hold it, just wait, because I'm waiting to hear that little beep on the flash telling me, okay, I'm ready to fire again. So, and I remember back in the day, that's what would annoy me, is that I would try to keep up with the recycle time of the flash. Right. So if this was too slow and the B10 was quicker, I would rather that. We actually did a test at this park maybe a year ago where we were comparing 2 Speedlights, and the ProPhoto won, but ProPhoto was actually a faster recycle time compared to that other brand. Now the other brand was an actual camera brand flash, so it wasn't like buying a third party or some cheap brand. It was actually a comparable in terms of price point and everything, but the recycle time suffered. It wasn't as fast, it didn't recycle as quickly. So that really put kind of my eyes open to ProPhoto Speedlights, because again, I had since then moved away from Speedlights and just focused on what I knew could give me the power, the recycle time, everything was kind of in the B10 world. This became a kind of eye-opener, especially the A10 when that came out. I was just like, wow, I did not expect the A10 to have that type of power and recycle time and things like that. So it was kind of cool.
One thing I did want to talk about briefly is modifiers, the availability of modifiers for both of these types of systems, because back in the day, literally there was almost nothing available for Speedlights. It was those, Gary Fong had one of those dome things, I think that we all had, and that was a way to you know, diffuse the light a little bit and spread it out evenly, maybe around the corners and stuff. And that was about it. And I remember still, you know, going and getting straws, black straws, and cutting them and gaff taping them together to make a grid. But now we have, you know, grid sets available, you know, through companies like Magmod, and of course Native brand, you know, for ProPhoto, they have their own grids as well. So things like that, smaller soft boxes, bigger soft boxes that are becoming available now. So it's becoming comparable in terms of, you know, the modifiers available for Speedlights versus the modifiers available for monolights. And I think at the end of the day, I think monolights still have quite a lot more variety. I think, again, the limiting factor becomes size and what you can put on a little flash like that. Again, going back to that 5-foot octa example, it's never going to hold that weight, right? Versus something like that where it can. And of course, all these other, you know, especially with ProPhoto, having, you know, about 200 different modifiers for lights, you know, most of those are catered towards the bigger monolights versus the Speedlights. But they've certainly come a long way, and we're able to create very comparable images because of the comparable modifiers that are currently available, which is awesome.
I really like this particular modifier because, again, it's portability. If I'm going to pack everything up, I personally don't like to be arming all the modifiers. I mean, I've seen videos where they show, oh, in 3 minutes you can put this thing together, and they show how they do it. And I'm like, well, this guys must have done it like 50 times and they know exactly how to throw it together. But for me, it's just another thing that if it could be 2 seconds to put it together, I like the fact that this collapses. You just stick it in your car, wherever you have to go, and when you need it, you just pop it and it's ready to go. Right. So modifiers, again, for Speedlights weren't this versatile in the past, and you would have to put it together. The ones that I was using you would still have a certain amount of time to put it together, and then when you were ready to pack up, you'd have to take it apart again. So
Yeah,
that's what made the benefit
And
for
so,
this.
I mean, that is a lot more, you know, when you really look at the setup time, it's this.
That's it.
Right? And then to tear down, it's this, and you put it in a bag, which is awesome. But this one still, you know, if we were to take this one down, there is still some time involved in getting all these, you know, all these things out and packing it together, make sure they don't fall out and whatnot.
Which is the reason I use Magmod.
Yeah, exactly. So again,
Magmod's like an umbrella, it just pops open and
without this being a Profoto commercial, it's just again,
Too late.
It's the gear that we use, so that's what we can talk about. But obviously, there's other brands that have now come a long way in making you know, modifiers more accessible and fast to set up or tear down. Definitely.
Very nice. Did you want to showcase any of the other modifiers? I just like that. That to me is something that even if I was shooting, again, different lens, but I would even just kind of do that.
Yeah, you
I
certainly
like
can.
just shooting this and having this off camera. I can kind of move it around. To me, that's a great thing.
Well, and that's what's great about, again, going back to which one would you pick, right? Again, that you have the ability to do that, to hold that light with one hand. It's super light. The modifiers are super light, so that has that going for it for sure. Versus, you know, putting up a heavier monolight up and holding that around for a few hours for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, in terms of modifiers, I'll talk about the ones that are comparable. Again, you know, a grid set that's available for a monolight like a B10 or B10X is now available in a grid format as well, right? So we're talking about these two modifiers. Again, different sizes, different diameters here, but again, we can create similar type of light now, based on, you know, whether you're using a monopod or a monolight and a speed light, right? Little domes as well to diffuse some of that light are available, and again, even now, Profoto released a Click Magnum as well, so you can now amplify that light another stop with your smaller A10. So it's getting, you know, we're in a good place, I think, where companies are starting to realize, you know, we are using lighting, we are really into off-camera lighting, playing with light, so it's nice to have those options more readily available to us.
With Speedlights, do you normally use them as your main light or as a kicker? Because, for example, if this was a multi-light setup, maybe the B10 is your main light, and this, I would think, and I've done this in the past, where I've just used this as a hair light, or even hidden it. I know with you have some images where if it's a couple, you might have one of these just behind and shooting so that they look like they're in silhouette.
Yeah.
So that's something that, just because this can be easily hid behind a person, that you don't see it. So that's, again, these are all creative things that you can do, but using the speed light. That's the way when I would think about using these kinds of lights. In my head, it's always like, oh, it could be a kicker or hair light or something coming in from the side. I know you've also shown, like, if you wanted to have fake sunlight coming in a window or something like that, you would use this with a gel, change the color, and then have that come in as a fake sunset or something
100%,
like that.
and that's another modifier that's, you know, available to both now, right? Smaller diameter for speed lights and bigger diameter for monolights, where you can, you know, change the color of those lights and play, which is pretty sweet, for sure.
Yeah. Does price come into play between them? Because I know that, for example, there are a lot of brands of speed lights that are very inexpensive. They run into the issues of build quality, the batteries, you have to use the AA's and things like that, but they are less expensive. You can buy a couple of those for then the price of one of the studio strobes. For me, because of the versatility of the studio strobe, and that's my preference, I kind of don't look at that money aspect now as much as I did in the past. Whereas in the past, I would have gone, and I did, go the speed light round and just keep buying speed lights.
Yeah, you know, I think when if you're starting out in off-camera lighting, it might be hard to justify buying one of those lights. But it's like that saying goes: you buy the fourth thing first, so you don't have to go through that experience, right? But I think if you're starting out, an inexpensive light might be a great way to get started. However, it does come with drawbacks, right? Some of the menus are extremely frustrating, and half the battles when I talk to other photography students, they just can't even get started because the confusion of what these symbols mean and how to actually get it working. So that's, you know, a big hurdle just to get started. But at least it's a way to perhaps get you to play with light. And again, that's how I started, with a very inexpensive light. And then you'll just run into those limitations, right? You won't be enough power. The recycling won't be where you want it to be. The batteries are gonna, you know, be all over the place, or won't allow you to recycle fast. And those frustrations are then going to, you know, get transferred into a decision, perhaps to get something a little bit more, you know, more reliable, more better quality, that kind of thing, right? And perhaps you end up with a monolight, right? If you are always working outside and always battling the sun, you're going to learn very quickly that a speedlight has those limitations, and they're going to come at you pretty fast, right? If you're using a light once in a while, and you're usually in studio, you use a family shoot, maybe you just need a pop of light, perhaps that's all you need. So it really depends. It's like choosing the right tool for the job. If you're a mechanic trying to fix a car, you got to have the right, you know, wrench and to get that job done, right? So that's what it boils down to, I think.
Yeah, and in conclusion, I mean, this is now the third webinar. We kind of based them all around lighting. We started off with natural light, we went to constant light, now we're talking Speedlights, studio strobes, but it is all different tools of light. There is no right and wrong. As a creator, I kind of look at it like, as you mentioned, is this the right tool for this specific job? I'm going to this location, this is what my ambient light will be. So all of those kind of factor into what am I gonna bring to this shoot. Now, again, in our case, where you have a selection of tools and you can kind of look down and say, I'm gonna take this and this and this, that's one. If you're starting out and you don't have the facility of having all the different choices, then you're kind of restricted, and then you have to do the workarounds and say, okay, this is what I have, how can I make it work?
Because at the end of the day, there isn't one tool to get everything done. Just like there isn't a 12 to 400 f1.2 lens out there. Something like that does not exist. I mean, I would love it, but it's just
kidding me how big that lens would be? I wouldn't carry that.
Yeah, but it doesn't exist. So you need multiple lenses, right? There's a reason why we have a bag of lenses. Yeah. So similarly with modifiers and lights, it's just, I always say a light is just like another lens. And you have to decide, and a modifier is just like, you know, is it the 2.8 lens, or is it the 50 millimeter lens, or is it an 85? What is it you're trying to create? And those factors come into play into in decision making, for sure. So there isn't one light that does everything. There are limitations to everything, right? If it isn't power, well, maybe it's weight. If it's not weight, it's perhaps, you know, something else.
And I think that in the end, again, it's a ranking. I usually then will say, well, what's my preference? My preference may be the B10. Like right now, at this time, that's my favorite light, and it's the one that I'll try to use the most. Yeah. But there are scenarios where I have brought the B10 on location, and it was a cloud-covered day, and the lighting was perfect already, and I didn't use off-camera flash because the lighting outside was perfect. It was great. It was giving me the results that I was looking for, so I didn't have to use that off-camera flash in that scenario. There are other times where I'm like, thank God I brought the light, because it really saves the day. Right. So again, understanding light, how it affects your subject, it really matters. And these are tools, and at the end of the day, a tool like this is incredible to utilize it to get the results that you want. And that's, I guess, the creative process. It's what I like. So anyway.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if we made your decision in choosing a Speedlight or a monolight any easier, but hopefully, you know, we've given you some ideas on how they can be used, how we utilize them, and of course, you know, the biggest thing, their differences and how they differ from each other and how we can use them. So, yeah, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your time. Thank you to BenQ. Thank you to our videographer, Louise. Thank you for our model, Julia, as well. Thank you to Yadú, and
thank you to you as well.
I'll thank myself too.
That's right.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Hey, hey.
So let's go ahead and take some questions. I'll give everybody a chance to send them in. And okay, so it looks like we had one question from Lauren during the webinar, or just now. Can you repeat the name of the collapsible modifier for the speedlight?
Yeah, so the one we used was a Profoto modifier called the Click Octa. So the Click series is a series of modifiers for the smaller speedlight type of flashes, like this one, like the A10 or the A2 or the A1X or the A1. So these are the smaller diameter lights, and so it's part of the Click system, CLIC. Yeah, and I think other than Profoto, Magmod has some options that could work with smaller speedlights if you're not using round-headed speedlights. There are these, I guess, mounts that would work together with their 2-foot or 3-foot Octa boxes as well. I don't know if I can any other ones that you can think of top of your head.
Well, like I said, the Rapid Box from
Rapid Box,
Westcott, that you could get, I think, in a 24 and also a 26.
Yeah.
I myself had the 26.
Yeah, but the one we used was the Click Octa.
And Lauren says thank you.
No problem.
One of the things that came up before as well about modifiers was when you are looking for speedlights, for myself, because I like the octaboxes, I would actually kind of go out looking for the modifiers to make sure that when I get that speed light, I already have ways of modifying that light. In some cases, most photographers that are shooting kind of like weddings and stuff, they don't really look at modifiers. They just look at bouncing the light. So they usually just have bare bulb, or for example, this comes with the dome. So they'll use those kinds of modifiers, or even the grids that we were kind of talking about.
Yeah.
And they gel it. So they're not really kind of paying attention to trying to modify or get a big softbox to put these in. Because I do a lot of flash that's off camera, that's the reason why I look to the modifiers kind of first.
And then a question from Tony. At an event, would you rely more on TTL and then manual settings, working inside and outside?
I would say, because I know we might have different answers here, I would say if the event has movement involved, where the subject that I'm shooting is coming towards camera and away from camera, then that's kind of TTL. That's the reason you would use TTL. But if it was a static distance from flash to subject, I myself would shoot manual because I want the same output of light every time. And one thing that I guess it's good to talk about TTL is based on the metering of your camera. So if your camera is facing a specific direction where there's a certain amount of light coming into the camera, it's doing the reading and telling the flash, this is how much power to give. But if I were just to move the camera and now acquire more light, or maybe a window now, that influences the metering and therefore tells the flash a different output. So when I was starting out, there was a lot of instances where I got frustrated because the flash would suddenly become brighter and then darker and then brighter. And I didn't realize it was because I was moving around and the metering was changing depending on where I was pointing the camera. Then, as Raph says, usually he'll start with TTL and then move to manual. So once he gets it dialed in, he will have it in manual for, you know, the static kind of shots. But I guess for you, is it also TTL if there's movement? Like, what would you use on the dance floor, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, not much to add. I would go about it exactly the same way as Yadú said, and yeah, I think a lot of it boils down to how accurate you find your TTL system to be. Because I've worked with other systems, different flash brands, different camera brands, where the algorithm or whatever it is that's used for TTL, it was just not accurate. So it was always frustrating to be able to use TTL. But again, like Yadú said, it's my starting point often. And I've been to, sometimes I'll do it at events, and then I'll just know that if I'm standing in front of, a table of people that are just, sipping on cocktails or whatever during a wedding, and I know that distance is about 5 or 6 feet, and let's say my power on my flash happens to say 6 at the time, and then I know that, another 10 feet, the power has to go up to 7, I'll just lock it in manual, and then as I'm photographing those people, I'll manually just adjust those settings, right? So if I come up to a table and I'm 5 feet away, I know that I need to be on 6, because, that distance is always the same, right, between myself and my subject. So it really depends. I think you just need to test out your TTL system, see how well it works. What Yadú said too about, make sure that, your positioning doesn't, it will influence TTL output as well. So just be aware of that as well. But if you're in a place with not a lot of window light, where the lighting's all the same, and you have a place to bounce, I think TTL is a good place to start, assuming that it is a pretty good system to begin with. So hope that helps.
Okay, and then Lise has a question. If you are taking many photos with a light source and it uses AA batteries, is it beneficial to get some sort of battery that has an adapter that lasts longer and you don't have to carry a lot of AA batteries around?
So there are certain battery packs that kind of bypass, but for me, even using Sony flashes, there are certain Sony flashes, the more expensive ones, that have an input where you can actually plug in a power pack, whether that's USB or a different type of connection, where you can bypass using AA batteries. But on most of the kind of entry level and inexpensive ones, the only real choice is to use the AA's. So that, again, was one of the reasons why it's very, not that it's frustrating, it's just that as Raph mentioned, when it dies, it usually dies at that moment when you need it, and you're fumbling, taking it. Not only that, but as he was mentioning, the batteries, they all go in differently, the positive, and then the next one has to be negative, and the next one has to be positive again. So just trying to figure that out in a rush, and that's where the frustration kind of fits in. Whereas with this, as he was showcasing, it's literally just in, and that's it. Like, I've just changed the battery pack. So it's a quicker change, and it's less frustrating, I would say.
Yeah, not much to add. Exactly what Yadú said. Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing if you have to fumble with those AA's, and some manufacturers will allow you to have an adapter to bypass, some won't. So it just depends on your specific camera model or flash model that you're using. But that's the reason why we got so excited when these came into the market, where we no longer had to deal with the AA's and then we tried to get rechargeable batteries and all that kind of stuff. And this just makes life so much easier. Recycling is faster, and the changeover is a lot quicker. So it's kind of one of those things where you kind of need to adapt at some point, where move on to a different system that will give you those benefits.
And Don has a question. Can you talk about using speedlights to overpower sunlight in full sun days? You were working in deep shadows that made using speedlights much more palatable. Yeah, so it's definitely doable, but again, you have to know the limitations of your gear. Now, I have used speedlights in midday with full sun, but now that speedlight is not going to go into a 3-foot modifier, and it's not going to be 10 feet back from my subject. It's perhaps going to be bare bulb, and it's literally going to be 3 feet from my subject's face to be able to get any kind of light on them. Because remember, you need to underexpose that ambient light first, right? So if you're not even going into high-speed sync, let's not even talk about high-speed sync, but let's say you're staying at 1/250th or 1/200th of a second, you're going to be at f11, f14, whatever it is, that if you're battling that noon sunlight. So in order to squeeze that light out of that f11 or f18 lens, where it's closed down so much, you have a tiny little hole there to get light in. That speed light you're going to find limitations pretty quickly. So you're going to have it super close to your subject, most likely bare bulbed, and again, that's just the type of look that you're able to get away with. Now, I've mentioned in the video too that I've used a bracket where we used to
have a double or a triple bracket to use 3 of these lights together, because again, at the time, big, lights like this were, we had a lead battery, a motorcycle battery to carry with it. So, there was a place and time for that. But in order to use the smaller lights, we just had, the limitations was always to likely bare bulb super close to your subject.
Yeah. And same thing, you would have to look at something like a reflector to amplify the power. So not only putting this maybe to full power, which then you have to deal with the recycle time. Again, that's different types of photographers. I like to shoot in succession because I know that usually my subjects, they might blink. So that very first shot with the flash, and I review the photo and they were blinking at that time, so I got to shoot again. So normally for me, I'll try to take 1, 2, 3 shots at once. So I want the flash to recycle as quick to avoid those kinds of things. But if I do have to battle the sun and then put this closer and, remove the modifier just so that it can give me full power and give me an exposure that I'm looking for, I'll have to deal with that recycle time as well.
Yeah, so in regards to the modifier, there are, and we brought it up in the video as well. It's called a Magnum reflector. It's more of photocentric, but there are other brands have similar modifiers, I think. But they will double your power, at least give you twice as much as you have. So another extra stop of light, let's say. So if you do need to have, something small like a speedlight in your hand at noon and you're at f18 and you need more power, that's another option where it's a reflector with these tiny little thousands of little, or hundreds of these little mirrors inside that are laser cut specifically to be able to amplify that light. But again, you're getting hard light, right? We're going to get hard shadows in your subject. It's not going to be that soft look where, you could maybe run it through an umbrella. But again, anytime you put any kind of modifier between your subject and your light, you're going to lose a bit of that power, right? So again, it's doable, but there are certainly limitations there.
And then guys, a pair of questions from Tony. First one, in this world of digital cameras, is a light meter still an important item to have in your equipment bag?
So if it's portraits, I don't use it. We're kind of spoiled now, right? With mirrorless cameras, we see our true exposure, we see previews right away. I'm more of a visual guy, I'm not a very numbers guy. So right away, light meters are always like, it's another piece of the equipment now that I need to involve in my process. Now, again, if you're doing commercial photography, maybe product photography, and you need specific lighting ratios where this has to be, the light on the left and the right have to be exactly the same distance, and you might want to use a light meter for those very, detailed types of shoots, certainly. But again, I've never, to me, it was always this extra bit of equipment that I didn't really find necessary because I'm more of a visual person, not so much a numbers guy. So again, to each their own. Nothing wrong with light meters, but I don't know, what's the last time you used one?
So I'm very much a gear guy, so I went and got the latest and greatest Iconic. I remember at the time it looked like an iPhone, the older like iPhone 6, but with a little light dome on the top. So I did have them. I actually didn't agree with the assessment that the light meters used to give me. So for example, if I did use the light meter and it would suggest, f7.1, 7.1, that's the correct aperture that you need to set your camera to. And then I would try it and I would look at the image and I'd be like, no, I want it brighter. Because at that point, even if it was technically correct, visually, my preference might have been lighter or darker, because the light meter doesn't know what mood you want to give or what end result look you want to give the image. It's just saying, based on what I see or what you've given me, this is what you should. To me, I used to look at a light meter as the suggestion. So if I was using a light meter and then after I would disagree with the calculation that it gave me, then I thought, well, then why am I using the light meter? I'd rather take a photo, look at the back of my camera, see what the exposure is, and then decide, do I need more light or less light? So after a time, I guess I discontinued using the light meter.
Yeah.
So part two, from Tony. When it comes to speedlights, is there a maximum size of modifiers that can be used?
Oh, we were talking about this because something like for speedlights, I've only ever used up to 26 centimeters. It's like 2 feet. I myself have never put it into like a 3 foot or a 4 foot octabox or anything like that big. And I think you mentioned that when you would double up the flashes or even do that triple, you could fill a large modifier, but then you've purchased 3 speedlights to do essentially what this can fill, no problem. So with the B10, for example, I typically use a 3 foot octabox with it, but I know that it can fill a 4 foot or 5 foot octa. What is your confidence level on a bigger modifier?
Yeah, so you have to consider a couple of things. One is sort of like, what are the mounting options of first of all, to get something small like this to hold a big modifier? Is it a separate bracket where the modifier is already set up, you're simply adding this onto it, or whether this is holding the weight? Because at the end of the day, this isn't meant to hold a 5 foot octabox, for example, right? Well, this one certainly can. So there's those limitations to consider. And then, yeah, you know, are you shooting at f11 and are you shooting outside and are you trying to fill a big modifier with this? Again, you're going to run into those limitations. So I don't think there's like a limit in terms of like no more than 3 feet. You know, you can get an extra large umbrella and still shoot a speedlight through it. There's nothing wrong with that. Is it the most, you know, is it the best option? Is it the most efficient option for you, what you're trying to accomplish? No, probably not, right? But is this the equipment that you actually have? Is this the most cost-effective thing? Like, there's all this other stuff that you need to consider. So, you know, everything is possible, but it's all circumstantial, really. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So, but yeah, to be safe, I'd say 2 foot octa or a small umbrella. You're good to go. I'm just gonna grab this light.
Yadú, that looks like the last of the questions. I'll give everyone a couple more minutes in case they need to sneak in.
One thing that I would actually want Profoto to do with these speedlights is they did improve the modeling lamp on the B10s with the B10Xs, giving the modeling lamp more power. And on these speedlights, there is a little modeling lamp. It's a little LED lamp at the bottom of the speedlight. But I would like to see a similar improvement in modeling lamp because, for example, if I was using this, and with many of our cameras now, we do have video as well as photography. So if they were to do like a round of LEDs around this, just a different design that can utilize LED light for constant light on a speed light like this, that would be suddenly more useful to me, just as the B10, if I'm using it for photos, and then I can also turn on the light. Like, for example, we're using the constant light, the modeling lamp right now is the light that's illuminating us.
Yep.
And it's more than enough for things like video and things like that. So if they were to do that improvement on this speed light, that would be amazing. And they would be the first because there's no other speed light that currently has a kind of dual purpose of using a strong constant light and be a flash.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that's another thing to consider when you're making a purchasing decision and what you're going to plan on using, you know, for what purpose. Like these have, you know, really bright lights, and they change, you know, you can change the color temperature on them, and they have multiple uses. This one here, as Yadú pointed, just has a single light, which is what most speed lights and smaller lights have, and it's just a smaller little one LED that comes out just so you can see where shadows may fall on your subject. Again, in daylight it's pretty useless, you can't actually see any of this, but in darker environments you can. So again, that's like something to consider when thinking, what do I where do I go? Do I get a, you know, a speed light or something a bit more bigger like a monolight?
Guys, one more question from Tony. When using TTL, how does the flash know how much power to output if it's not facing the subject? Say you're bouncing it through a modifier.
Can you repeat that one more time?
When using TTL, how does the flash know how much power to output if it's not facing the subject? Say you're bouncing it through a modifier.
Does the flash know how much power? Well, it's still using it's still using the same system. Just because the flash is not direct, the flash is still hitting the subject. So wherever you're pointing your lens, because it's TTL through the lens metering, right? So the light may come directly at your subject, or it may bounce, but it's still hitting your subject. So that whole system, it still does the same calculation. It doesn't matter where the light is really coming from, whether it's coming from directly or bounced. So it doesn't really change how that whole system works. It just knows, because if you bounce that light and less of it hits the subject, TTL might say, okay, listen, you need a little bit more light in order to get proper exposure, right? If you have it directly on the subject, it will hit the subject directly, and it'll say, oh, maybe you don't need as much light because, again, it's direct and not bounced. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it is one of the reasons why I still like manual and not TTL, because for me, it sounds like a lot of smart guesswork on the part of the flash and of your camera. It's judging the light that it gets in, and it's making a good guess as to this is how much power I think it needs. But sometimes those good guesses, again, might be confused because the metering itself might be seeing window light coming in, and that will change what the metering reads. So for me, I would want more, again, consistency, and I would rather set the power, take the photo, and then see if that's too bright or it's not bright enough, and I can make an adjustment, as opposed to letting it kind of guess.
Yeah, for me, it's a really good starting point. It's always my starting point, because a lot of people will say, like, where do I start? And I guess if I had to give you any kind of, you know, advice on where to start in terms of flash, I would say start lower versus higher. So don't start your flash at full power or half power. Maybe start it at 1/16 and see how that looks. If it's not enough, creep it up a little bit to 1/8. Maybe it needs to go to 1/4, but at least you'll get to see it getting brighter and brighter eventually as you take your test shots, versus being full stop, full blast, everything's white. You don't know if you're 3 stops over or 8 stops over, or what's happening, or what's even going on in the back of your camera. So start low and creep in the light, and increase the power. Or again, use TTL to start, and that's what I do. At least it gives me a place to start. And I'd say 90% of the time it's good. With ProPhoto's system, the way my system works, 90% it gives me what I need. But the other 10%, when it doesn't, at least it's a place to start, and I can make those adjustments after that initial TTL test shot.
And many cameras do have a way to see if you've clipped any highlights, if any highlights were overexposed. So that's what I use on the Sony camera. When I take a photo, if I'm unsure, looking at the back of the screen, whether it's overexposed, if I've created a hotspot or something, I can go into the display modes, and one of the display modes is the color histogram, and also showing me if there was any area. So they would actually flash on the screen if I've overexposed an area. So I use that as, again, a guide, so that I can just kind of tone down the light if I need to. I can just bring that down so that it can, you know, not clip that area, that highlight.
All right, gentlemen, that looks like the last of the questions. Several thank yous came in from Lauren, James, Tony. But on behalf of BenQ, a big thank you to you both. Part 3 was just as good as parts 1 and 2. Love the series, and yeah, a big thank you from BenQ for all the knowledge and training and tips you're bestowing onto us.
Yeah, our pleasure. Hopefully, it was educational, or you picked up a couple of tips. But yeah, if you guys also want to reach out to us, obviously you can leave comments on the video that's going to be posted, or find us on Instagram or anywhere else. We're happy to. I'm an open book, so if you've got questions, and Jadú is as well, we're happy to help. We love seeing the industry get better and stronger, and people creating really great images. So if we can, if we inspired you or helped you with something, or answered a question that is helpful, that's awesome to hear. And thanks for having us as well, for obviously to BenQ. Yeah, we had a lot of fun doing these.
And thank you to you as well. I know Raph has a workshop that he does called Being Afraid of Light, for people who are specifically wanting to learn about flash, because again, a lot of photographers, when they start off with natural light, they get very accustomed to it, and then using any kind of off-camera flash or on-camera flash, it's very intimidating. So and I've been at the workshop. It's a great workshop, so that's something also to check out if you want more information on that.
Awesome. Yeah, it's called afraidofthelightworkshop.com if you guys want to check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen. This is going to be a wrap, and until the next one.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody.
Good night, everyone.